Welcome to this explainer. Okay, let's dive right in. Today, we are tackling a fundamental question that honestly trips up countless researchers. What actually is a literature review? For a lot of people, it feels like a chore, right? Just some preliminary hurdle you've got to jump over before you get to the real work. But as we're going to see from the foundational text by Andrew Booth, Diana Papayannou, and Anthea Sutton, that perspective is entirely backwards. We're going to break down exactly why the literature review is not just a reading list. It is, in fact, a rigorous form of actual research in its own right.
Here is our roadmap for today. 1. The intellectual scaffolding. 2. Reviewing is actual research. 3. Types of literature reviews. 4. Essential researcher skills. And 5. Avoiding common pitfalls.
So consider the massive difference between the myth and the reality here. We've got the mechanical summary. That's the old school mistaken belief that a review is just a passive reading list where you regurgitate what other people have done. But then we have the reality, knowledge generation. Booth and his colleagues argue that when a proper review is conducted, it's an active, highly dynamic research practice. It's a whole series of strategic decisions about what to read, what to include, and how you analyze it. You aren't just absorbing information, you're actively creating a brand new synthesis.
Section 1. The intellectual scaffolding, defining the foundation.
How do we actually define a literature review? Well, according to our source material, it's a structured investigation into existing texts, but it absolutely doesn't stop at just reading. The whole goal is to actively evaluate evidence, make critical judgments, and crucially, identify exactly where new research can contribute. It lets you become intimately familiar with existing debates, spot where the experts agree or completely disagree, and gauge the actual strength of the evidence. Actually, it's not just a final written product. It's an ongoing process of strategic decision-making. Now, you might be wondering, why does this all matter for your project? A well-executed literature review plays a bunch of vital roles, and they are definitely not just checkboxes. It clarifies your research questions by showing you what has already been answered. It reveals the exact gaps and weaknesses where the field desperately needs more work. It offers proven theoretical frameworks. It stops you from wasting time on duplicated efforts, and it fundamentally enhances your project's credibility. This is absolutely crucial in fields like health, education, and social policy, where evidence-based decision-making is the gold standard. This really hits the nail on the head. Booth and his co-authors state, the literature review is not a formality, it is the intellectual scaffolding of the entire research design. Think about that metaphor for a second. It's like a giant puzzle, and without the scaffolding, the whole building collapses. Without a thorough review grounding your work in a documented body of knowledge, your primary research literally has nothing to stand on.
Section 2. Reviewing is actual research.
The paradigm shift. The authors make an incredibly powerful argument here. Conducting a literature review is a form of primary research in its own right. When you break down the methodology, it aligns perfectly with traditional scientific methods. Step 1, you have to define a precise question. Step 2, you select your data. Step 3, you apply strict inclusion and exclusion criteria to filter that data. And Step 4, you synthesize those findings. You might uncover new conceptual relationships or spot emerging trends that nobody else saw, simply because they were only looking at individual studies in isolation. This builds into a real game changer of an idea. Texts equal data, right? When you're doing a literature review, your data isn't sitting in a petri dish and you aren't gathering it from some massive survey. The published texts themselves are your actual data. Recognizing this completely reinforces the academic value of the review and helps us appreciate its complexity. It is not a background task. It is pure knowledge generation.
Section 3, Types of Literature Reviews. Categorizing knowledge.
So, not all literature reviews are created equal. Selecting the right one depends heavily on your specific question, your timeline, and your resources. A narrative review gives you a broad, thematic summary. It's flexible, though it can sometimes lack a bit of rigor. If you need something tighter, a systematic review is rigorously structured, transparent, and replicable to answer one highly specific question. Or, say you're in an emerging field, a scoping review explores the sheer breadth of what is out there. We also have meta-analyses, which statistically combine results from multiple quantitative studies, and finally, realist reviews, which investigate how and why specific interventions work in real-world contexts. Elegantly mapping this out lets you match your methodology directly to your academic goals. Now, the authors are very quick to point out that not every single project requires a formal capital S systematic review. However, you absolutely must adopt a systematic mindset.
Applying principles like transparency, setting explicit criteria for what you read, and aiming for reproducibility will infinitely strengthen even the most basic narrative review.
Section 4, Essential Researcher Skills, the Practitioner Toolkit.
Engaging in this rigorous process doesn't just produce a piece of paper, it builds you up as a researcher. You develop highly transferable skills. First, you learn to formulate focused questions by identifying tensions in the literature. Second is search literacy, like actually knowing how to navigate databases, keywords, and filters effectively. Then comes critical appraisal, followed by synthesizing incredibly diverse findings into coherent themes. And finally, you develop strong academic argumentation. These skills contribute massively to your long-term confidence and just make you a vastly more capable academic overall.
Let's do a quick deep dive into one of those skills, critical appraisal. Because reading just isn't enough. You have to actively judge the material. Critical appraisal means looking at a study and evaluating its methodological quality, its theoretical coherence, and its practical relevance. You aren't just summarizing what the author said. You are weighing the evidence to see if it actually holds up under scrutiny.
Section 5, Avoiding Common Pitfalls, Navigating the Traps.
Okay, if you take only one thing away from this entire explainer, please let it be this warning. Don't just make a list. We have all read them, and they are incredibly boring. A literature review is not a laundry list where you passively drone on about study A and then study B and then study C in total isolation. If you do that, your work will completely lack analytical depth.
Beyond the dreaded list format, Booth and his colleagues identify a few other major traps. Unclear or inconsistent inclusion criteria is a huge one. It makes your review look highly selective or worse, inherently biased. Another trap is relying way too heavily on secondary sources instead of going straight to the original data. And finally, overlooking methodological diversity can artificially narrow your perspective. By documenting your decisions and applying that systematic mindset we talked about, you can easily navigate right past these traps.
Ultimately, the authors present a really compelling vision here. A literature review is a dynamic bridge. It traces what is already known, it highlights what remains completely uncertain in the field, and it explicitly shows exactly how your new work fits into the puzzle. It sets up your very own contribution to the ongoing academic conversation.
So I want to leave you with this final thought to ponder as you approach your next project. How will your literature review bridge existing knowledge and new inquiry to contribute your unique voice to the academic conversation? Remember, understanding how to conduct a reflective, rigorous review is not just about academic practice. It is an entirely new mindset. Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer, and happy researching.